Long before the Pilgrims or Jamestown, England tried to plant its first serious foothold in the New World, at Roanoke. They sent men, women, and children across the ocean, full of hope and big promises. And when England finally returned, Roanoke was gone. No bodies, no battle, no rescue. Just one word carved into wood, and a silence so loud it echoed for centuries. Cut to an empty shoreline, wind whistling through broken fort walls. A colony that didn't just fail, it was wiped out of the story. Before we jump into today's story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Follow me as we uncover the hidden battles, secrets, and legends of history that textbooks never tell you. England in the 1580s was hungry, not just for land, for power. Queen Elizabeth I's court buzzed with talk of riches across the Atlantic, a world waiting to be claimed. Spain's empire loomed like a warning, and English merchants wanted their own slice of glory. Wealth, influence, and the bragging rights of planting England's flag in a new world. Back in London, pamphlets and letters sold a fantasy. Endless fertile soil, rivers so full of fish you could practically scoop them out, and native people who could be persuaded or forced to serve England's plans. Investors poured money into it, not just chasing profit, but status. They wanted their names tied to something historic. But the land wasn't a pamphlet. It didn't care about speeches in court or bold promises on paper. The reality was brutal and unpredictable. Summers scorched crops, winters wiped them out. Swamps bred sickness. The forests were alive, but not friendly and not waiting to be tamed. These were English hands used to towns, farms, and familiar seasons. Not survival in a wilderness that didn't forgive mistakes. Still, England took the gamble, and the people they sent weren't seasoned colonists. They were soldiers, craftsmen, and families. Ordinary people driven more by hope and duty than experience. Their loyalty to the crown was expected to make up for what they didn't have. Training, supplies, a real plan to stay alive. Roanoke's foundations weren't built for long-term survival. They were built to look like success. Every wall raised, every cleared patch of land, every sign of progress. All of it meant to impress investors back home. Proof England could rival Spain. Proof the first step had worked, but it hadn't. Not really. The land didn't bend to ambition, and England hadn't provided what it would take to survive the dream it sold. From the start, Roanoke wasn't just an experiment. It was a test, a gamble where human lives were the chips. And when trouble came, England would face a question that would haunt every future colony. Was this about building an empire or protecting the people sent to build it? When the first real crises hit, the choice England made would shape not only Roanoke's fate, but the future of English colonization for generations. Roanoke wasn't just a dot on a map claimed in England's name. It was a fragile little world built out of hope, desperation, and promises printed back in London. Soldiers were there, yes, but the colony's heartbeat was ordinary people. Men who had worked fields, women who had kept homes together, children who crossed an ocean because adults told them there'd be a future on the other side. They built homes from local timber, threw up palisades to mark English ground, and tried to grow food in soil that didn't behave like home. Every day was a negotiation with the environment. Unpredictable rain, relentless insects, salt water ruining seedlings. Sickness was always nearby. Dysentery, fever, malnutrition, and survival demanded skills they didn't have. No maps, no guidebooks, almost no experience for what this place could do to a human body. Pressure changes people, and it changed them fast. As food ran low, trust cracked. Parents watched children grow weak. Men argued over leadership, supplies, and blame. And every time the horizon stayed empty, every time no ship arrived, the message hit harder. England's promises weren't protection. The colony was alone. But life didn't stop. People adapted because they had to. They learned what they could from the land. and cautiously from the indigenous peoples nearby, who watched them with curiosity, suspicion, or both. Trading became a lifeline. Diplomacy became survival. Every interaction carried risk, because one wrong move could turn fragile peace into disaster. And still, they held on to one thing: hope. They waited for a ship like it was a miracle. They stared at the horizon like it owed them an answer, because admitting England might never return meant admitting they had been abandoned. And then England made a decision that changed everything. A decision that forced Roanoke to face a reality even harsher than the wilderness. Europe was burning. War dominated everything. Spain, England's rival in faith, empire, and power, loomed across the sea. Suddenly, every ship, every coin, every soldier became a calculation. Roanoke wasn't a priority anymore. It wasn't even a project. It was a risk. And now, it looked like a liability. Supplies meant for the colony were redirected. Ships that could have brought help were tied up in the war effort. And the return voyage, the one the colonists were counting on, was delayed for about 3 years. For the people on Roanoke, that delay was everything. Isolation became total. Seasons turned, crops failed, disease spread. Every empty horizon was another reminder. The empire had bigger concerns. Roanoke, once a proud symbol of ambition, had become an inconvenient problem, something to postpone, something to ignore. And survival got uglier. Families scavenged, shelters fell apart, people prayed for rain, prayed for food, prayed for a ship that might never appear. England's silence wasn't just distance, it was policy mixed with circumstance. Somewhere in London, men in power weighed prestige and strategy, while a colony starved. Years passed. Children who arrived as kids grew into adolescence without seeing a single English sail return. Hope didn't vanish all at once. It drained away slowly, day by day, until reality took its place. Survival would require independence from the very nation that had sent them. And so the first great test of English colonization wasn't only the wilderness, it was the empire's indifference. Because when survival replaces loyalty, identity becomes negotiable. And soon the colonists would face a choice that would define their very existence. For Roanoke settlers, neglect stopped being temporary. It became a verdict. England wasn't coming. Not soon, maybe not ever. Supplies weren't arriving. Reinforcements weren't sailing in. The crown had bigger threats. Spain's armada, unrest at home, the constant tension of staying in power. Roanoke was left hanging between loyalty to an empire and the raw need to stay alive. And that's the moment everything shifted. Because out here, being English didn't protect you. Titles didn't matter. Social order didn't matter. The rules of home were useless against hunger and sickness. Meanwhile, the native peoples around them knew this land like breathing. The seasons, the rivers, the forests. The English couldn't simply impose themselves. They had to adapt or die. So they faced the kind of choice empires hate. To survive, they couldn't rely on England anymore. Some settlers sought out local tribes, cautiously, learning customs, trading for food, figuring out how to live with the land instead of fighting it. Others moved inland, away from the exposed shoreline, towards safer ground. To anyone watching from the outside, it could look like the colony vanished. But to the people living it, it was survival. One hard decision at a time. They changed routines, they learned new ways, they crossed cultural lines, and they made choices the crown would have called betrayal. Not because they wanted to rebel, but because they wanted to live. And eventually England did return. But what they found would challenge everything the empire believed about control, loyalty, and what success was supposed to look like. When English ships finally appeared on the horizon, it should have been the turning point. After years of hunger and uncertainty, those sails would have looked like a promise kept. Relief, reinforcement, rescue, a way home, or at least a way forward. But when the sailors stepped onto Roanoke, there was no one. The settlement was empty. Homes that once held families stood abandoned. Roofs sagged, doors hung loose, fences were down, crops were gone, the palisades were falling apart. And there were no bodies, no fresh graves, no clear signs of a fight. The colony hadn't been found in the middle of a disaster. It was just missing. And then they found the clue, a word carved carefully into a post within the fort's palisade, Croatoan. Nearby, the letters KRO carved into a tree. It didn't look like a warning scratched in panic. It looked deliberate, like a sign left for someone who was supposed to come back. The returning Englishman realized something unsettling. This didn't look like a massacre scene. It looked like movement, and the colonists had agreed beforehand to leave a sign of where they went, and to carve a cross if they were in distress. No distress cross was found. That should have been an answer. But it only raised bigger questions. Back in the wrecked settlement, officers argued. Maps were unfolded. Theories flew. Letters were written in urgency and disbelief. But the truth stayed just out of reach. Whatever happened to Roanoke, it didn't leave England a clean story to tell. And in that quiet, abandoned fort, one reality became clear. A reality so uncomfortable that England would soon try to bury it. If this story fascinates you, make sure to subscribe and check the playlist. There are more epic battles and hidden histories waiting to be discovered. Roanoke's truth wasn't just painful, it was inconvenient. England expected a simple ending, a massacre, a tragic failure, something that could be explained, mourned, and filed away. Instead, they got uncertainty. They couldn't prove what happened, and the evidence suggested the settlers may have moved rather than being wiped out where they stood. For the Crown, that kind of uncertainty was dangerous. If the world saw that England could abandon a colony and lose track of its own people, it wasn't just embarrassing. It was a crack in the image of control. It raised uncomfortable questions. Was England capable of building an empire? Was it competent? Could it protect the people it sent? And the deeper possibility was even more unsettling, that colonists might have survived without England, that they could adapt, trade, learn, live, outside imperial authority. Roanoke became a mirror reflecting the empire's limits. There are hints, there are clues, but the full story remains unresolved. So England did what empires often do when the truth doesn't fit the narrative. It controlled what it could. Roanoke wasn't celebrated. It wasn't turned into a lesson. It was allowed to fade into a mystery, because a mystery was safer than admitting the empire didn't have answers. By letting Roanoke slip into ambiguity, England tried to control history, but the land never fully let the story die. A few years after Roanoke vanished from view, England tried again. Jamestown. This time they came with stricter planning, better funding, tighter oversight. The Crown and investors wanted control, hierarchy, accountability, immediate profit. Every ship, every colonist, every supply list counted like a ledger. But behind that careful structure was something else, a quiet cleanup. Roanoke, the colony that ended in unanswered questions, was pushed out of the spotlight. Jamestown became the story England wanted, the first permanent English settlement, the heroic struggle, the foundation myth, the irony. Jamestown barely survived. Disease, hunger, conflict. But by framing Jamestown as the first permanent success, England rewrote the narrative. Roanoke became a footnote, and anything that didn't fit the story of control and progress stayed in the dark. For the people who disappeared from Roanoke, and for anyone who might have lived on afterward, that mattered. Their struggle wasn't honored. Their choices weren't recorded. Their story didn't become legacy. Because Jamestown wasn't only about survival, it was about memory. And Roanoke's people paid the price for England's silence. In some interpretations, Roanoke's settlers didn't simply vanish. Some may have survived, not as a colony anymore, but as people absorbed into the land and its communities. Children who once carried English toys may have learned the forest rules. Adults who once relied on London's authority may have learned to hunt, trade, negotiate, and live by a different rhythm. They may have lived, just not under England's name, and that's the haunting part. Survival doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like disappearance. Names change, customs blend, old traditions fade into new ones. And the thing England tried to build, a showcase of dominion, may have become something else entirely. A quiet place where survival mattered more than loyalty. But if they did survive, it came with a cost. Because an empire doesn't like stories it can't own. Their existence wouldn't be recognized. Maps wouldn't mark them. Records wouldn't honor them. History would treat them like ghosts. Even now the story lingers. In archaeology, in debate, in faint traces left behind. Their triumph, if it happened, was quiet. Not conquest, endurance. And that kind of endurance is hard to erase completely. Which raises the final question. If Roanoke's story wouldn't behave, why did England choose to bury it instead of telling it? Roanoke didn't vanish because history proved it was destroyed. It vanished from the official story because England never found a definitive answer. And uncertainty didn't serve the empire. England could survive a failure, even a catastrophe. Those could be explained, blamed, turned into warnings or martyr tales. But Roanoke was different. It was a story England couldn't control. Because if colonists might have survived without orders, if they adapted, traded, learned, and lived outside imperial authority, then England's power didn't look absolute anymore. It looked limited, fallible, human. So ministers, advisors, and chroniclers redirected attention to Jamestown, the clean, permanent origin story. Roanoke became the lost colony because that label was safer than admitting the truth. England didn't know, and what it didn't know couldn't be used to build an empire's legend. Empires remember what flatters them. They forget what threatens them. And Roanoke became a mystery, not because it was entertaining, but because mystery was the only version of the story the empire could live with. And yet, the silence speaks. The first English colony didn't fail only because people disappeared. It failed because England's plans couldn't guarantee survival, and because the ending refused to become a neat imperial victory. Roanoke is a reminder that survival, ingenuity, and courage can endure even when empire forgets, and that sometimes history isn't written by the lives that persisted, but by the powers that demanded control. Thanks for watching. Click subscribe and dive into this playlist next. More untold stories of empires, warriors, and history-changing battles are just a click away.